Callie. How are you?
G'day.
Hi, how are you, Riggsy? So I was just showing you I got my appropriate shirt on for today.
Oh, I should have been wearing that hoodie too.
Yeah, it is. I've lived in it, unfortunately. It needs a bit of a wash.
Actually, I think mine's covered in dog hair. It's what I've been wearing to work each day.
So
Right. Right, it's that. Are you going to hear me all right, Fairs?
Yeah, getting you fine. How is it up at Omeo?
Beautiful and toasty, as you'd expect. You know, we were in shorts and thongs today.
Yeah, it was actually really nice today here.
It may have been raining all day, and it may be expected to rain again all day tomorrow.
It didn't rain until, what was it? 20 to 6 here?
Of course.
Yeah,
It
literally.
was really surreal around the basin, Sarah. You could hear all the sirens just going around the Dandenong Ranges.
Oh, I can totally imagine. Are you actually in the basin?
No, I'm in Scoresby.
Yeah, but you were up at the station.
Some people have done some amazing
I did
stuff.
see the live thing from the basin, but I know that, I don't know if you know where my parents are, but I remember always being able to hear a couple of sirens down there. They're down near the basin primary.
Yeah.
Hey, big grief.
Sarah, tell me if
Yep.
you can see that screen.
Riggsy, yes, can see that screen.
Righto, it's all new to me on this stuff. So if I do that, can you see the next screen?
No. Yes, the next screen has come up.
Excellent. I better make sure I got the right PowerPoint up there, eh?
Yeah, totally.
I have no idea how to get out of that though. Oh, hang on. Stop share. There. Oh, look at me. Look at me.
I'll give it another couple of minutes. They're still getting people jumping on, so.
I should do a shameless plug for Air Ops gear. I can make a fortune.
Yes, you can, and I'll vouch for it.
Yeah, they are good hoodies, Cal.
So will I.
They are really good hoodies.
I love my hoodie. I've got my T-shirt. I actually have a T-shirt that I bought from my brother wanted and was going to buy off me and never paid me. So that's still sitting in the drawer at my parents'.
All right, cheap brother.
Yep. And Kelly's nodding.
Yeah. Because you wore it to the Good Friday appeal once.
I probably did because I love it. But yeah, it's okay. I think we've made about $1,000 on the East Gippsland gear.
Oh, good. That's really good.
You know, anything's possible tonight with where I am and the connectivity I've got.
I've had really bad connectivity every time. And so tonight I've actually come down to the station, so I've got good, half decent internet.
Oh, good plan. Oh, look at that. I see someone from Ballarat on. Excellent. Best city in Victoria, probably Australia.
Incredible.
I'll try to write some.
I'll give it until 7:35 and then we'll start. It's not this one, is it?
I'll sort that out. I can always drive. I got other people with me here too. I got special guest appearances tonight.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You're actually.
I hope you got some sound effects background you know, when you introduce them.
I was going to say, you're calling from deployment.
Yeah, how cool is that? Really cool in the snow.
Did you see Les got on board tonight, no issues?
What's that?
Oh, I just see Les is on tonight. We had some the other night with a brigade Zoom meeting, and he's on tonight, which is good. You've got a
Yes, Sarah, back on. Back on.
Right, we'll give it one more minute and we'll have a start.
So you blokes behave yourself while this video conference is on, right?
Are they drinking the beers, are they, Wayne?
No, we wouldn't drink beers when we're on deployment.
Of course not, sorry.
No. That's
Because you're so going to be out there tomorrow.
busy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hopeful. We're always hopeful we're doing something.
Right, we might make a start. Thank you everyone for joining us again tonight. Here in Bairnsdale it is cold and wet, but hasn't been raining all day, but rain is good. I'd like to welcome Wayne Rigg, or Rixie. Rixie's been working with Aircraft 8 for ages now. He can give a bit of an intro. Believe your title is Commander.
Apparently.
Only at the moment.
Commander Aviation Innovation, is that correct?
Yeah, that'll do.
Excellent. So I'll hand it over to you, Riggsy. And if guys have got questions through the night, either raise a hand or use the chat function, and we can go through questions like that. So thanks, Riggsy.
Thanks, Sarah. Good evening to all, and I'm Riggsy. Thanks for having me tonight. I hope you're all staying safe and sane in the lockdown. I'm coming to you live from sunny Omeo, where currently it's pouring with rain and due to snow. But I'm up here doing some land management functions with aircraft to partnership with Delp and Parks Vic. But appreciate the opportunity, everyone coming on tonight. This is new for me. It's certainly the first time I've ever done any sort of online training or discussion, particularly in Ugg boots and tracky dacks. So I'll just make sure that the camera stays about here, and I'll try not to get too much reflection from up here as well. The lighting's not real good. So I thought tonight, Sarah asked me to have a chat about AirOps, and there's obviously so many functions of that that I wasn't real sure where to start. So I thought I'd go through some basic 101 AirOps, and happy to take any questions on anything. Bit of background. So I'm now qualified. I've been in the CFA about 25 years as a staff member, Commander of Aviation Strategy now, previously Commander of Aviation, Air Ops Manager, Air Attack Supervisor, and for the last couple of years I've been running the Night Ops program, which I'm happy to take any questions on as well. So, and I don't know, Sarah, did you send that link around with the Air Attack article?
Yeah, I did share it on the Next Gen Facebook page. So if people hadn't been through the Next Gen Facebook page, they wouldn't have got it.
Yeah, no worries. So that's about the Gippsland deployment this year. So happy to answer any of those questions any of the way through. So,
and if they want it, send me a message and I'll let you know.
Cool. So for me, there's really three key elements that I want to get through for the message tonight when we're dealing with AirOps. And the first one is safety. And safety is first in everything we do. So if you take safety, communications, and effective use of aircraft or good direction, if you take those three things away tonight, I'd be really happy, because that'll help us in terms of gaining a better understanding, but also making sure that we're using the aircraft efficiently. Because as you know, we're seeing them more and more. We're relying on them more and more. They do support ground crews. They're not there to put fires out, but they're certainly a force multiplier these days. And with the 52 aircraft, it's a record amount we've had in the fleet this year, which surged up to around the 90 during the peak of the Gippsland fires. So we saw a lot of different aircraft we haven't seen before, interstate aircraft, large air tankers, along with our regular stable fleet that we have year in, year out. So in terms of safety, the key message that links to safety is communication. So those of you that have used aircraft before know that, if you can talk to the pilot or you can talk to the air attack supervisor effectively, and give good communications about where your crews are on the ground and what you want the aircraft to do, then you'll get a much better outcome. I mean, our whole idea is to keep small fires small with rapid initial attack. And I'll talk a little about PDD because that's something that I was involved with the development of, and I think it's quite a fundamental change in the way we've done business. So any questions on that too, just jump in. So safety, communications and direction. But just to start off with, and we'll just go for a little bit of aircraft 101, if I can get this up and running. And Sarah, can you confirm that you can see that for me?
Yep, all good.
Excellent. So I just thought I'd run through, and most of you should be aware of these, but it just gives a good overview of the types of aircraft we've got in our fleet that we utilise. So the Type 3 helicopters are the Holden Utes of the world. You know, they're the utility machines that are used for air observers, air attacks, crew transport. You'll see the photo there of the squirrel with the drip torch underneath it. They're used for aerial incendiary and also for firebombing as well. There's one Type 3 helicopter with a tank under it, Benalla, as part of our fleet. So that's typically the aircraft you'll be talking to, if not a bird dog, which is a fixed wing, that'll have the air attack supervisor in it, if there is one on scene when they're coming through. Obviously, everyone hopefully now has heard of Firebird 300, and that was an innovation that we brought in a number of years ago that gives us near real-time airborne information gathering. That's what AIG stands for. It's obviously got the infrared camera on it and the live video feed as well, along with mapping capability. That MX-10 camera is a high-end military-grade camera that gives really good information back to incident management teams, to the State Control Centre, Regional Control Centre, and hopefully some of you have seen the product of that. I think the future of 300 also then sees in an innovation space information being streamed directly to you on the fireground on a tablet or such, so that you're getting real-time information about what your fire's doing in your sector, or as a strike team leader or crew leader that's relevant to the task at hand. So that's something that'll emerge, I think, into the future with 300. And I'll skip through these pretty quickly and just ask any questions as we go, or at the end. Probably just hold them to the end. The Type 2 helicopters, I think, says we've got people from basically across the state. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Maybe people can put in the chats where you're all from, so we can get some idea.
And if there is anyone on from, you know, say the northeast, I'm happy to speak slower if you like. I was going to say Gippsland, but that'll get me in trouble with you. So the Type 2 helicopters, you know, that's our mainstay of firebombing aircraft, with the 212s, the 412s, the 204s, the 214s, essentially for firebombing with tanks underneath them around that 1,400 litre mark. You know, average 1,000 to 1,200 litres once they burn off a bit of gas. Used for crew transport, you know, sling loading, and also rappel machines. So at Hayfield and Ovens, Delpad rappel crews, affectionately known as dopes on ropes, because who would jump out of a perfectly good helicopter for 3 seconds on a rope to spend 18 hours on a Rayco? I don't even know what a Rayco is. I used to, but highly skilled, highly trained people, and a very effective tool, particularly in remote firefighting for you know, new starts of lightning strikes, and rappel crews also for that construction of helipads, so we can insert crews and get them onto the ground. So very effective and used widely this year in the Gippsland fires as well. Then most of you are aware of the Type 1 helicopters. There's obviously a couple of air cranes, one at Moorabbin, one at Essendon. The S61s now are a mainstay of our fleet, with 3 of them, one at Colac, one at Mansfield, one at Ballarat. And, you know, I reckon particularly people around the Melbourne basin would have seen an orange helicopter at some time in their firefighting career over the top. 7,500 litre tank. They average about that 5,500 litres until they burn off some gas. And you can see there with the 61s, the 4,000 litre tank and about a 3,500 litre bucket. And of course, when I talk about a, you know, average or about in volumes, aircraft go out typically with full fuel, so they don't pull full water until they burn a heap of fuel off, and then they start pulling a lot more water. So that's that balance in the aircraft. Then I think the most underrated aircraft in our fleet, because we have become really helicopter-centric in CFA operations, are the fixed wings. So the Air Tractor 802s, 3,200 litre hoppers in them. and there's a couple of turbine drums up near where I am at the moment, based up here at Benambra. The fixed wing turbine aircrafts, quick. We send them out in pairs, very effective. Really, if you look at where they're based, Casterton, Stawell, Hamilton, Mansfield, Bairnsdale, Albury, I think I've got most of those locations. They can get out quick into areas a lot quicker than a helicopter can, and that's about that rapid initial attack. So good bits of kit as well. Then you've heard of LATs, large air tankers. So the Herc there with the XXL RADS tank in it, nearly 15,500 litres. That's been, our LAT program's been running about 5 years, I guess now. We see the Herc used more often. Then there's the RJ85 with 11,500 litres. And then last few years in RFS, and of course this year with the fire season in New South Wales, the DC-10 came back. 45,000 litre tank, but they're actually restricted to about 32,000 litres, which is still a phenomenal amount of retardant water or foam to put out. But whether we see those again in the future will probably depend on what the season's like in terms of activity. The other aircraft which probably don't get a lot of mention or highlighting, but are equally as important, are our fixed wing, light fixed wing fleet. So the top left there, the blue and white striped aircraft, twin engine, Turbo Commander 690, fast aircraft. That's an air attack and lead plane for our large air tankers. You've got the King Air, which says Fire Scan 300 there. They're now based at Nowra, so that's our line scan aircraft. And things like the Cessna 337, Bird Dog 381 are twin engine aircraft. When we're using a platform for air ops, so if we want to use either an air observer or an air attack, what we actually would prefer is high winged aircraft, so that you're not looking down over a wing. And if you look at the 337, it's called a push-pull. So there's an engine in the front, one at the back, and a high wing. So that's really good visibility out of that piston aircraft. The Turbo Commander, you're sitting forward of the asymmetrical engines, so you get really good visibility out of that, and it's fast. And then with the line scan, you've got the King Air, and we're using Learjets as well. And most people should be familiar with line scan, but if you're not, this is the type of imagery that's now coming out of the line scans, real time through satellite, and it's geo-corrected and brought straight into our databases. We've started in Victoria to use this information not only in planning and operations, but a lot more in community messaging. And if you look at how RFS in New South Wales have used it for the last few years, this is really important because that image in colour really tells a story about fire intensity, and when that's overlaid on a map about where you live near a town, people can really relate to it. So line scan is something we're relying on more and more. The problem with line scan, or the challenge with line scan, the limitation is it can't see through cloud. So it scans through smoke, but it can't see through cloud. So if there's cloud over the fireground, you obviously can't get a line scan. That's been challenging at times because people have put all of their eggs in one basket and relied on line scan for all the information about the fireground, and also with airborne information gathering. They've forgot about the good old Mark 1 eyeball with a piece of paper and a pencil and a radio. You know, sector commanders, strike team leaders, division, divcoms, whoever's out there that can provide intel back and information about what the fire's doing. And often IMTs these days are going, we haven't had a line scan for 12 hours. We're blind about where the fire is. And it's a good thing they're relying on the technology, but it's a bad thing that there isn't a backup to get additional information from other sources.
I'll second you with Riggsy. We rely on line scan information so often in the planning unit, and sometimes we're hamstruck when we're like, we can get an air observer up and get a little bit of information, but the line scans give us so much information.
They do, and they're really good, but if they're not available, there needs to be alternatives.
Exactly right. It's scary how much we rely on them nowadays.
Absolutely, and the thing I'd say about aircraft to anybody is that regardless of weather with line scans, but any aircraft, and I'll say this right now, if your entire objective is based on the use of aircraft to meet your objective, you'll fail every time. Aircraft are another tool that can be used, but they can be redeployed, they can break down, they can be, there's so many things that could go not only wrong with them, but be utilised elsewhere, that if you rely on your entire mission being successful due to aircraft, you will fail, and you'll fail every time. So take that away tonight about, we're getting so reliant, particularly with PDD, seeing aircraft turn up. If they don't turn up, people are going, what do I do? Well, you fight the fire that's in front of you like you always would. So it's the same with line scan and IM2s. In terms of our mission, you know, you may have heard the term that aircraft are simply tankers with wings, which is something that I coined a few years ago, and it's taken off a little, pardon the pun. But it's about rapid initial attack. It's about keeping small fires small. We got the 52 across the state in our fleet, and we move them according to risk as we need to. Not as well as we should. If we were fair income about addressing risk, what we'd do is actually load up the west of the state. So when our all of the weather comes through from South Australia and moves through the state, of course, this is provided that there's a front coming through and it's not bad across the entire state. We need to get better at actually moving aircraft with those fronts, in behind lightning bands, in behind whatever, so that once the risk drops out, for example, in Casterton in the southwest, we actually load up where we need it, where the risk is increased. That's something we need to get better at, and something that's a cultural shift that's needed. I just thought I'd talk about PDD for a minute, Says.
Yep.
And I won't be much longer on this, but it really just sets the scene. Just to go back, the Royal Commission talked about aircraft dispatch taking 34 minutes from when you on the fire ground called for an aircraft. So previously, the process was you call Vic Fire, say you want air support. Vic Fire contacts the RDO by a pager. RDO rings in. Vic Fire says to the RDO, they want air support. The RDO then gets information and rings the air desk. On average, what we found through the Royal Commission is that was taking 34 minutes just to the notification of the air desk. And then from there, the air desk would ring the aircraft. It takes 15 minutes to get airborne, or within 15 minutes, and then however long it takes to fly from the fire, from the base to the fire. So you can think about the times around that. The PDD system, which I hope everyone's familiar with now, I think is one of the fundamental changes we've made in the last decade, if not longer, that sends brigades out the door and sends aircraft out the door at the same time when they meet the trigger. And we're seeing aircraft get on scene before brigades, which is a great thing. They can actually get out there. And I'll talk to you about tactics about that in a minute, if there's an aircraft there before there's a truck there, or even an air attack. But what we've seen is our entire fleet average airborne now from time of call is 8.4 minutes. So if you just reflect on that from a minute, from 34 minutes to notification to airborne in 8.4, that's a fundamental shift in how we support you with our aircraft. But again, things can, they can be redeployed, they can break, whatever else, so don't always rely on them. So PDD is simply based on assignment areas like your brigades are, and there's a footprint for every location across the state. Are the footprints absolutely 100%? No, because there has to be some administrative boundaries around districts and groups and those sorts of things to apply some sensibility to it. But in the main, PDD, and I'll be interested in your feedback after I finish talking about what you think about PDD, but I think it's been one of the most fundamental shifts in a very successful program that we started in Bendigo. That I had just a quick little war story. When we started this, we were told to make it happen, and I won't use the language that we were told to make it happen with. I went to a meeting with some people, and I said, well, why don't we, how are we going to do this? Why don't we send the brigades out the door, the aircraft out the door with pager? And there was people telling me we couldn't train the pilots to do it, and there were all the reasons why you couldn't. And I said, I'll just go out on a limb here. If we can get these pilots to start an aeroplane or a helicopter, take it off, fly out, fight a fire, come back and repeat safely, I'm pretty sure we can get them to operate a pager. So, and the proof's in the pudding. We've been able to teach them how to use a pager. So just to finish off, and I covered some of these, but in terms of the critical components of that aerial firefighting, and Sarah, I've actually got some other slides for down the track if anyone wants to see them around tactics and that sort of stuff, but I won't go into that tonight. Without ground crews, we're buggered. We can knock fires down, we can hit the head or the flank, but without you guys actually chasing up, following up, blacking out, those fires have a chance of reigniting. So ground crews are essential. We're there to support you, and we work for operations. We work for whoever the ops is or the IC, whether you're in an incident established or whether you're on the established, in an FCV. Is it an FCV and an FAV? What's it called these days? Anyone? Sarah? What's a ute called these days? An FOV or an FCV? Don't know? Someone can
think
message.
FOV.
FOV.
FCV.
FCV.
Yep.
FCV.
FCV.
Forward
There you go, the
Command
vote's
Vehicle.
on FCV. That's the trouble with being in the air so long. Fuels,
Oh, there you
obviously.
go. An FOV is bigger.
Ooh, well, there you go. So the fuel's important because without fuel, pilots are pedestrians. Training's important, and that's a little bit about what we're talking about tonight, but we do a lot more. Strategies and tactics, communication, safety. So I'll just close that out there, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about, is that close? No, hang on. Stop share. There we go.
There you go, Riggsy. The FOV is equivalent to your bus at Wendouree.
Excellent. Righto. Well, see, I've learned something tonight. I just call it a ute on the ground. So, basic 101. You're turning out to a job. There's a PDD aircraft coming your way. No air attack with it. People say, what should we do? Well, it's very simple. When you get there and there's an aircraft overhead, establish who it is, what their call sign is. So if you're in a slip-on, an ultralight, a tanker, whatever you're in, you've got a call sign. We'll so have these aircraft. So what I say to you is write it on your windscreen with a whiteboard marker or in the front of your logbook. It's HeliTac 343. And the pilot is Ben, who happens to be here tonight, by the way, and he'll give you a special guest appearance shortly. So if anyone's got any questions of helicopter pilots, you can ask him. So write down so you know exactly who you're talking to. So why is that important? I used to work at Ballarat City Fire Station, and there was Ballarat Brigade. And if I'm in Ballarat City Tanker, I'm not answering the radio to Ballarat Tanker. I'm answering the radio to Ballarat City Tanker. So if you know the call sign of the aircraft you want to talk to, make sure they then, when they're listening out on the radio, go, all right, I'm in Firebird 302. That's who you're calling. So write that down. That's the key thing. The second thing is if you're just getting established and this fire's just starting to get up and running and you're not entirely sure about what your tactics are or your strategies, ask the pilot for some information. They're the eyes in the sky above you. So if you don't have an air observer or an air attack there, even if you do, you can ask them, but you can ask the pilot directly and talk to them. And if you're unsure, all I say to people is get them to put a load straight across the head of the fire, or if there's any assets under threat. It's as simple as that for getting established while you're setting up your command post or getting your crew sorted about where you're going. And then from there, what I don't want you to do is go, just do whatever you can, do the best you can, or give it a crack. We don't want to hear that language. What we want is a very defined strategy about what your objective is and how we can help do it. Now, that might take the first few loads to do until you know what's going on because it's a dynamic, evolving situation. But if you do those things, you establish your comms, then safety's going to fall into place because unless you clear your crews out of the way or it's clear to drop, the pilots won't drop. Because the last thing we want is dropping a ton of water on someone's head or dislodging branches. So you get those in place and then you get your direction. You're in business. And if the fire actually starts to escalate, hopefully you've got it pretty quickly. If you haven't, the fire starts to escalate after that. You've got an air attack coming in of which you then talk to about how they might give you some advice about the best way to go about it. And they can also give you some intel. Now, I'm just looking at names that I can see on this. I can't see any air attack supervisors on this tonight. And I'd say this whether they were or not. If you've got an air attack supervisor overhead and you want some information about where the fire is or where it's going, because if you think about your state strategic control priorities, and I'm pretty sure the second one, and I see Rochi's on, he can tell me otherwise, but the second one's still about community messaging. Says, that sounds right? I think. An air attack can give you that information. You know, this thing's away. You're going to need a lot more trucks. It's headed towards the town of Omeo. And this is where I suggest that, you know, it might reach to. So they can give information back straight away to the district duty officer, whoever it may be, to get the community messaging out that's needed. So if an air attack ever says to you, I'm an air attack supervisor, you need to get that information from an air observer, let me know so I can sack them. All right? Because an air attack supervisor is an air observer and they're up there as an eyes in the sky as well. And their job is to give you info. I hear air attacks saying it all the time and I ping them all the time. Now, if they're busy doing tactical stuff to keep people safe and make sure aircraft aren't dropping on crews or community or whatever, that's fine. But I can't just say to you, I can't help you. Air attacks are in the sky. Get info from them when you can to help inform what you need to do to actually undertake your job. If it's then getting bigger and bigger, get air observers overhead. I actually would prefer air observers to get going at the same time as air attacks so that you are getting that information straight out and you get more information quicker, so you can make better decisions and better informed decisions. So just to round that out, says safety comes to, good comms means good safety, which then leads to good direction, which then hopefully means that you get that fire out. So with that, I reckon I've talked enough for the time being. Let's throw it open to questions, comments, or any sort of heckling that wants to go on about my Ugg boots. Anyone?
I do know we've got a number of people with, I think we've got 28 people on board tonight, and I do know that there's a number of people here that do have aircraft roles, from air observers to aircraft officers. So that is a really good thing. But if people have any questions, but did you want to touch on just Skippy fires at all? Any?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much going on operationally. Just a bit of background for myself this year. I actually went to New South Wales. I was the first one into New South Wales. I think it was September, October as an air ops manager. So I did 3 tours up there with those guys. Oh, there's Matty Taranto as well. You can say good day. And then came back down and spent a fair bit of time in Gippsland as a regional aircraft officer or air ops manager. And then did a stint for 4 days as an air attack between Christmas and New Year when that fire really busted out and came down into Sarsfield and Bruthen and Buchan and all those sorts of areas. So if you haven't read it, it's not a bad yarn, and it tells a really good story with all the pictures that are in it of that air attack article that Sarah shared, she said, to your Facebook. I got to say that I've been doing this, I don't know, can't remember now how many years I've been doing air ops, but that period, and particularly I think it was the 30th, if not the 31st, when it busted out into that area, was probably one of the most physically, mentally and emotionally draining days that we'd had in a long time. So everything I said about communications and safety is still relevant, but when shit hits the fan, what's the first thing that we lose? Our comms. And that's fine. The radio discipline is not as good as it could be in the air or on the ground. And our job then is to actually start picking our targets and making sure we're supporting you guys, because trying to radio people up and finding out who's in charge and who's where, I'll give you a little tip. We really don't get down low enough to see what's written on the side of your truck about which brigade you're from. And although I say to everyone, do you know where your roof ID is? Everyone goes, yeah, it's written on the dash. I can tell you when I call it up, no one answers to it. So we we're not running our own show, but we're certainly making sure that we integrate with the ground crews. But that day, it was busting out, threatening a lot of assets, spotting in front of fires everywhere. We started up in Galandapi, up at the seldom seen tower. And as we busted in there, here's a funny little war story. Well, I think it's funny. The seldom seen tower fella, I heard him say, we're on watch. And I sort of looked over at all the smoke and radioed him and said, what are you doing up there, mate? You sure you want to be on watch? Yeah, it's right. And I reckon 3 minutes later, no more than that, you hear on the radio, seldom seen tower, no longer on watch. He did a tactical retreat out of there because it was coming flying through there towards Galandapi. We ended up from there over at Tambo Crossing with a crane, helping out ground crews that were busting their ringers there and doing a great job protecting communities and farms. And then we ended up down in that, that area northeast of Bairnsdale where it really came through. And that's when things got really busy. When you're running a crane, 2 or 3 61s, a number of mediums, fixed wings and everything, that's when you've got to be right on your discipline with your radio and right on your discipline with your safety, because you can't save every house and we can't be everywhere at once. So it gets to a point where your training kicks in and your experience about who you take where. And if you think about spot fires, smoke, radio traffic, it's not our role to be air traffic controllers, but as an air attack, you are conducting a dance, if you like, up there to make sure everyone's safe and not going to run into each other. So you establish what we call a racetrack or a pattern, so that everyone's going the same way for water, and that people, obviously, they've got tanks and buckets, so they're taking different times to dip. They're going to different water sources, and you're just coordinating as those crews come in and out, and then picking the targets about where you want to go. Because once a fire like that starts and it's off to the races, your best chance then is crew support in asset protection. And then also grabbing spot fires. I mean, that thing was spotting, Sarah, I can't remember, but I know that Benny was working on spot fires 6 or 8 Ks in front of that fire.
We've got a couple of guys that were actually out on the ground there, including a strike team leader, so they've probably got more idea of what they saw spotting on the ground. I was sitting at the station at that stage, but yeah, I was sitting in at Bairnsdale watching it. It was crazy, but I know we've got a couple of guys that were on the ground.
Okay, and look, what I can say is the ground crews and the work that Forest Fire Management do, CFA and everyone else in support, parks and whatever else, is just phenomenal from where we are. Our job's really to go, look, there's an opportunity to do a drop there and take the sting out of something or protect an asset, and that's what we'll do in those instances. We'll still try and communicate where we can, but the reality is it's such a dynamic situation. Our job's to make sure, A, we don't drop on anyone on the ground, and B, we don't run into anyone in the air. So days like that, actually have a read of that article because it probably captures it in a better spirit than what I can say. I'm just looking down here. I've actually found there's a chat function on this, Sarah.
I was going to say, can you see them? Can you see the chat messages? Otherwise, I can read them out to you.
Yeah, no, I've got them here now, so I'll just go through them. So the composition of the retardant that you drop, Andy Dixon or Matt Taranto. Come on, Matty. Retardant, tell me what's in it.
On the spotlight there, Riggsy. It's a phosphate-based, effectively salt compound with a gumming agent and a dye, and it basically coats the fuel, and as the moisture dries out of it, leaves this residual crust on it, which is effectively not retardant. Sorry, it won't burn, it's fire retardant, as the name would indicate.
Yeah, thanks, Dicko. And Matty from SES took forever to actually unmute. What do you want to add?
I had the chat open and I couldn't close it to hit the unmute button. But exactly what I would have said, Dicko. Well done, mate.
So the thing about retardant is that it's a good product, which I believe is overused incredibly. I think a lot of people think that retardant is going to save the day. I think there's a cultural shift needed, and this wasn't the question, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit anyway, about how we actually go about our tactics with whether we use water foam or retardant. Because what we're seeing is a lot of lines of mud being put down that are either never tested, as in fires never come in onto them, or B, they fail, and then people say that retardant or fixed wings don't work and large air tankers don't work. What we've actually got to go back to is our tactics and have a discussion about how we use retardant, how we splash it about. Because last calculations was that, and this is full cost, so import, mixing, all the rest of it, is about $5 a litre. So even a drop out of a 3,000 litre fixed wing, Air Tractor 802, 15 grand, you want to think about where you're putting that. That's without the aircraft costs of flying, etc. And then if you go up to a 15,000 litre lat, think about that. And then also think about a 40,000 litre VLAT. And if you put that retard in there, how you're going to use it. So that should answer the question about retardant. It's there until it rains. But retardant, if not backed up by ground crews, typically, if you look at something like, and that's a really good lead in if I can actually achieve this, so bear with me for a tick. If you look at something like this, here we go. Righto, retardant. So you put direct attack, you put foam and water in like that, pretty straightforward. But it's exactly the same as if you put retardant indirect in front of it like that. Did everyone see that? Okay, Sarah, if you can, everyone can. Now, just look at that picture for a minute. If that fire burns up to the retardant line, that's fine, but it then sneaks out to that northeast corner and the southeast corner of that fire because we haven't completed the line. So you've got to overlay your retardant when you lay it like that, but you've also got to back it up with ground crews or machinery, whatever it may be, and that proves the point about that aircraft don't put fires out. Ground crews do. I'd actually prefer in that instance to use retardant like that and go direct attack with it. I think we should use retardant a lot more in direct attack because it gives us more options. But that's a view from me that people will have a different view about. Now I'll move on. If there's more questions, just keep putting them in here. There's a question there from Mark. With nighttime operations, has it been looked into for infrared strobes to be placed on firefighting vehicles? That is something we looked at. Just to go back, I ran the night program for approvals and then the first year of the trial and handed that over. And Nick Ryan and Mike Forsyth have run that for this year just gone. During the trials and the time I spent in the US with LA County and others at night ops, it was determined that we actually don't need any sort of strobe or identification of lighting specifically on crews or vehicles. Typically, and I'll just give you an example. So the NVG technology now doesn't turn day into night, but I was out the back of the LA, and I'm bragging now, but anyway, I might as well. I was out the back of the LA hills, out behind Hollywood with the LA County guys at night looking for a lost hiker. And the dispatcher for 911 said to the hiker, look, they're out there looking for you. Hold your phone screen up in the air. And we could see that from miles away under the night vision goggles. So any sort of lighting that's already on your vehicle, whether it's the flashes, whether it's your parking lights, your headlights, are very, very easy to see through night vision. Strobes actually give us a little bit of a distraction in terms of looking through goggles. So the answer is we've looked into infrared strobes and found that we don't need them. And we've found the same working with ground crews at night. You can identify them very easily that where they are either on their vehicle or off their vehicle, because they'll have a headlamp on, torch in their hand, a phone or whatever. You can very easily see people on the ground without that, without the need for the strobes. And if I haven't answered your questions, just keep punching into that chat. How does someone go about getting into air ops? That's a good question. So there's two streams with air ops. There's the airborne role, and then there's the ground support role. And Kelly, you're an air observer. Maddie's an aircraft officer. Dicko's an aircraft officer. I'm not sure who else is on that is.
We've got Les Beachy, who's an air observer, and we've got Matt Harris from District 22, who's an air observer.
Cool. I can't see them on my list, but hi guys. So you've got two streams. If for the how to get into it, well, first of all, through, and Sarah, you could probably talk better about the brigade level, but I would assume that if it's something you're interested in, you go through your training officer that flags it with the captain or with the relevant catchment officer or BASO. And then in each district, there's an aviation coordinator that looks after that sort of stuff. And every year, Luke Patterson is the aircraft officer for CFA, or the aviation officer. He sends out an email to the district saying, training course coming up, what are your nominations? And so the first step in the ground is airbase manager, and then that follows on to aircraft officer. And then for airborne roles, it's air observer through to air attack supervisor. At the moment, to be an air ops manager, you have to be an air attack supervisor. And that's a bit of an old boys club, and it's a bit of a secret handshake stuff from the past. And we're in the process of changing that. There was an argument to say to be an air ops manager, you need the tactical experience of an air attack. Bullshit. You need experience, and you can get it from people. It was just a good old white boys club, the secret handshake stuff. So we're changing that, and quite rightly, because there's some very, very good aircraft officers out there that can be air ops managers far better than a lot of our air attacks. So keep an eye out. If you're interested, raise it through your brigade and then back to your BASO or catchment officer, and then they'll raise it with the courses.
Pre-recs for air observer, is it crew leader? Is it above crew leader? I don't know pre-recs. I don't know CFA ones. Kelly may also.
Yeah, it's crew leader and above. And Riggsy, just to help you out, I've posted the regional and district coordinators, the aviation regional and district coordinators, into the chat. So if anyone wants some more information on for their local district or their region, they can just click on that PDF that I've attached, and they know who to speak to.
Oh, brilliant! So have a look at that. Look, if it's something you're interested in, a lot of people go, "Oh, I'd like to go on the airborne role," and to be honest, I say to a lot of people, "Yes, it's great. It's very rewarding, and if it's something you're keen about, it's great." a lot of people have said, oh, I'm a private pilot, I'd really like to do it. The problem with pilots is they try and fly the aircraft rather than actually do their agency role. So we try and steer pilots away from it because they're always trying to fly. But if you're interested, absolutely get involved with it because it is very rewarding. You can learn a lot. And what I would say though is bringing your operational experience is important. In terms of airbase manager, you can't be an aircraft officer before you've been an airbase manager. So there is those prereqs and those pathways, and the same as an air attack. Says.
I was just going to say there are opportunities also, and I can't enforce enough to make sure you go through your brigade. Don't just necessarily contact your district officer. Make sure you go through your brigade and BA training officer. But I know in District 27, we actually have some brigade members trained up in mixing and loading as well, and some radio operators for airbase. So if you are near a DELP airbase, you may also be able to get involved by doing mixing and loading and having a look in that area as well.
And what Sarah meant to say is if you were near an EMB, we work.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, Riggsy.
That's all right. That was just a cheap shot by me. Absolutely, mixers and loaders, just as important as without them. So there are a number of roles, and you know what? I actually think a mixer and loader is a really good pathway to an airbase manager. It gives you a really good grounding about what that role is about. Dicko or Maddie, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, spot on, Riggsy. It gives a good feel for the safety elements on ground at an airbase, which are really key if you're wanting to do airbase managing.
Maddie?
Yeah, 100%. Look, it's always a bit harder within for those that might be around the metro area because there's no fixed bases around metro area. There tends to be a lot more reliance on rotary wing rather than fixed wing. So those outside the metro probably got more of a chance to get on an airbase more regularly, but that's some great grounding for safety, as Andy said, safety around aircraft, in the hangar, working around aircraft. Because when you step up to aircraft officer, you're advising the ops officer and incident management team on what aircraft capability and capacity is. You need to have that grounding first.
That's good advice. And we got some awesome loading crews across the state. I use Hamilton, Dicko's neck of the woods as an example. Leighton and the boys that are down there, these are people that are still very useful and able people, but they're not operational people on trucks anymore. It's a really good use for them because they're still able-bodied and they're still, want to help. And they've done some phenomenal amount of loads and hours on those bases and really help. So it doesn't matter which age bracket you're in, there's a place for you in air ops if it's something that you're interested in as well. So if you do that, just to round that out, just go through your brigade and then back into your bassos and your catchment officers. There's a comment there about what I was talking about, Gippsland similar to Wye River. I was at Wye River as well. It seems to follow me around. I'm not sure what's going on there. But absolutely, it was very, very similar to that. And in scale, pardon me, I mean, Wye River was 116 houses burnt down on Christmas Day. I think we ended up in the 200 or 300s on that period that went through Gippsland. Someone might be able to message that. But yeah, very, very insane, intense flying, and you've really got to be on your game. There's a really good question here from Callum about working with aircraft and ground crews in the urban interface. And comms is absolutely essential there because typically the urban interface sees more brigades turn out quicker than the rural areas, and that's just the nature of how many brigades there are in those areas. The same principles apply. Good communication that leads to safety and good tactics. What is really important for us, and whether you're in the urban interface or rural, is to point out and don't assume any hazards. So if you see a radio tower or you see power lines or a big stag tree, point them out and have someone in the aircraft confirm that they've seen them. So what you don't want to do is go, oh, I think Riggsy's seen that wire, and the next minute he hits it, and oh, I thought he'd seen it. Point out any of those hazards. The other thing is there seems to be a lot more rubberneckers, simply because of the population when you get into the urban interface of community. So it's really about making sure you control them and you're nowhere near the drop zones as well. And I can't emphasise enough safety and comms. I think there was a fire not long ago where the fire investigators or someone got dropped on by a crane or something similar in the urban interface, and that's been written up somewhere. But never assume that pilots and air attacks have seen everything on the ground. Always confirm. Always confirm that you know. And as an air attack, they should always confirm clear to drop anyway, so that we don't end up in an instance where anyone has anything dropped on their head, whether it be a dislodged branch or a ton of water, or in the case of crane, 7.5 tonne of water. So that's a really, really good question. There's a comment there from Dale about intro to AIMS is also a prereq. Thanks for that, Dale, for air observers. So I'd expect that to be the case. Is that not the case for crew leaders, Sarah? Mustn't be.
No, I don't believe intro to AIMS is a prereq to crew leader. But if anyone can do intro to AIMS, or at least the AIMS awareness, I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. Gives you that really good, understanding of that. Were there any challenges that became apparent for air ops in the recent Gippsland fires? Absolutely. Scale of fire in the landscape, and it's no aircraft. There's a lot less than there are fire trucks, and there weren't enough fire trucks and crews. There's not enough dozers. There's not enough tankers. There's not enough slip-ons. There's not enough G-wagons and all those other things. So for us, it was about prioritisation. And there's bigger issues here around making sure that the distance you were travelling. So some of those air ops, I was coming out of Bairnsdale and I actually went to a job up just south of Jindabyne. So if you think about how long it takes to fly over Buchan, up to Gallipoli, up into Jindabyne, then operate, where do I get my fuel from so that I can get back to the job rather than having to come back to Bairnsdale? So the logistics, that's where that aircraft officer role is key, to make sure that we have fuel, food, water, accommodation, and that we're integrated in with what's working. The biggest challenge we've got in the education of air ops, I believe, is for incident controllers and ops officers to listen to their air attacks. If they're saying to them, we are not being effective, we need to stand down and go and do something else, or wait for this fire to make a run. I often hear, and we obviously work for ICs and ops officers, so ultimately if they tell us to do it, we will do it. But I often hear, just keep bombing it, keep going. And fortunately, my experience this year in Gippsland was when I gave feedback to the ops officer that we're simply not being effective here because of long turnaround times, lack of water, etc., we're going to stand down. They accepted that and then redeployed the assets to where we could be effective. So that's one of the challenges. At time and space in Gippsland, because of the vastness of the place. And then if you look at the remoteness of what happened in Malakuta, which I wasn't involved with the aircraft in and out of Malakuta other than the 61s bringing people out when they could. And then we got the military involved. So it became a very, very complex operation. But the challenges really could apply anywhere in the state or the country. The same challenges pop up. That's why we have highly skilled, trained and confident people to deal with those challenges in incident management teams and in specialist air ops roles.
And because you didn't have enough of them, I was down there for a bit as well. And one of the other things, obviously, weather. Weather's a critical component which kept aircraft grounded for days on end. Running out of Marlow, we couldn't get off Marlow, we couldn't get down to Malakuta. So aircraft were just sitting on the ground, whereas people sitting in control centres on fire grounds with nice clear skies, but we physically couldn't get the aircraft up to them. And that needs to be understood. If we say we can't get an aircraft up for safety reasons, we can't get an aircraft up. It's not that we don't want to help the crews and provide them the assets that they need. It's just purely we can't get them up. I had that in New South Wales as well this year, or last year. Stuck on the ground for 3-4 days.
That's a good point. And we look at smoke modelling and we try and move our assets around so that we don't get stuck. But the reality is, if you can't see, you can't fly. And if the smoke socks us in for 3 days, that's the reality of it. And that goes back to the comment I made earlier about putting all your eggs in one basket. If you rely on aircraft to meet your objective, and that's your sole way of getting this thing done, you'll fail every time. You need to have alternatives. So Questions about PDD.
Hang on, Rixie. I don't know if you've changed anything, but you're really distorted. So
Oh, I've not changed anything.
that's okay. That's okay. We can still hear you. You're just a bit distorted.
All right. Well, that's what people tell me all the time. So I'll keep trying, but I'll talk a little slower. Maybe it might help. There's a question about PDD at Bendigo. And why does Bendigo not have PDD, but every brigade that borders it does? I'd need to review that, and it's a question probably for Luke Patterson with the new footprints, but I suspect that the Bendigo City Proper Brigade, if that's what you want to call it, its assignment areas would predominantly, if not wholly, be urban area. So the risk of, and I may be wrong, I'll stand corrected, but the risk of a bushfire or a grass fire in that actual assignment area would be minimal. So what we have tried to do in some of those footprints is remove sending an aircraft to what might be a bin fire or a car fire. It's a question that I think that'll be the answer, but I'll stand corrected on that, Mark. So not Mark, Michael. Mark's asked about where do we see the future. We're evolving and the world's evolving in air ops. I've just spent 2 weeks before the lockdown, thank goodness, in the US at an aerial firefighting conference and meeting with operators that are particularly, I think where the next change we'll see is Chinooks, Blackhawks, Super Pumas, so ex-military type 1 aircraft. So we expect to see more of those on the market soon as tanks get better. And they'll challenge the air cranes, for example, which are, 1960s technology, still a very good tank and a capable aircraft, but we'll see some different types. I think there's also a lot more scope for RPAS, drones, UAV, whatever you want to call them. And in terms of the future, I think you'll find basic firefighting 101 will still apply. It's no different to the ground than the air. That is, put the wet stuff on the red stuff. So you're still going to need piloted aircraft, but you may see some autonomous flight aircraft in the future. So Boeing are already trialling, unpiloted aircraft for firebombing. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on there. Sarah, do you want me to log back in and out, or is it all right? No, you haven't unmuted, it says.
Riggs, it's just probably typical CFA internet, mate. You probably run out of time on it, mate.
Yeah, that's probably the go. Is it unbearable, or do you want me to try and jump out and jump back in?
You're no more unbearable than usual, mate.
I can't hear you, Says. You're not unmuted.
It does actually sound like you're in a helicopter.
Okay. So do you want me to try and jump out and back in?
Is it annoying too many people, guys?
No?
Nah, it's manageable.
All right.
Manageable. Keep going.
We'll keep trying. So the future will be interesting, but one thing I do know is that governments and agencies, if they want increased technology, better aircraft, better tanks, they're going to have to stump up more money. We can't keep funding the fleet that we've got, or an increased fleet with the same bucket of money. It's that simple. So that's a fundamental shift. Parliamentary budgets are based on 4 years, and we're going to get better bang for our buck if we contract aircraft for 5 to 7 years. And that'll take a fundamental shift in policy for governments, but that's a whole political decision. I think if you look at the changes that we've had, airborne information gathering, large air tankers, PDD, we've put aircraft into the Mallee at sea like Oyen and Nil and the Wimmera for harvest. These things will keep evolving. Pardon me. I do think one of the biggest changes that's needed very soon is an aircraft capability of fire agencies 24/7, whether that's based out of Essendon or Moorabbin or wherever it may be, that not necessarily on the scale of a New York or an LA or a London or a Hong Kong, but we're going to need an aircraft that can move crews and people a lot quicker. rather than relying on contracted aircraft that we may or may not be able to get, because once they go off contract for the summer, we haven't got them until we bring them back on. And whilst we might be able to borrow the coppers and the ambos, they've got a primary role. And if we've got people on board to go and do a job and the coppers are going to go catch a bad guy, or the ambos got to go and rescue someone and save their life, they're going to drop us on the side of the road. So I think we need our own capability in that scope for an all hazards, all communities type approach in the future. And that's something that I've done some study on and some work as well, and I'll be pushing that discussion in Fire Rescue Victoria when it comes about. If I end up there, who knows where I'll end up. I might even come over to SES, Matty. Would you have me? I don't know.
I don't know. We'd be scraping the bottom, mate. But...
Yeah, don't answer that. But just to highlight, this season in Gippsland, all the roads were closed, as you well know. So something we've been working on, and Joddy Cat and others have championed this, is to put road accident rescue gear in a helicopter. Others do it, and if you look at what Queensland did during the Commonwealth Games, they put a cache of equipment and people on standby with an aircraft that if it's gridlocked or you can't get through, you can land and provide support to SES, CFA, etc. And that's an interesting concept that we need to look at as well. That's probably enough about the future. What criteria do pilots take into account with PDD? Callum, I'm not entirely sure what your question is, but in terms of the triggers, they carry pages that go off at the same time as if the assignment areas go off and there's a grass and scrub or undefined fire in that footprint. And then they check a dashboard which shows you typically the FDI is 12, the trigger. If it's met the trigger and that dashboard's in green, those pilots will simply walk out to the aircraft, start and launch unless they hear otherwise. The whole idea of PDD is rapid initial attack. There is a lot of debate about whether the trigger should be 12 or should be 24 or something different. We went with 12, and that was guided by Mark Gilmore when we did the trials in District 2 at Bendigo. And, you know, if you look at 12, that's where I think low kicks over to the moderate in the FDRs. So 12, an FDI of 12 or 14 can take out 5 houses in a grass fire without a worry in the world. You know, it's mild, but a fast-running grass fire under wind. So my view is that 12 is the right FDI, and I take the same view, albeit it's a little more expensive. I'd much prefer an aircraft to get halfway to a job and you guys catch it and it turn around and come home than it not be launched like the old days when we wait until it got too big and then we launch the aircraft. And that's a shift that comes with a cost, but it's a cost that's worth paying in my view. So yeah, PDD is about the triggers. If the trigger's met, they go, unless Vic Fire tell them otherwise. And the other way they can be dispatched, don't forget, you can still get aircraft through the RDO. So if the trigger's not met, contact the RDO through Vic Fire and they can page it. There's a question there about maths. Do you see maths system becoming more predominant with RAF aircraft helping out? Is that something similar to what Colson's setting up in New South Wales? So maths, for people who don't know, is a modular air firefighting foam system. It's a roll-in, roll-out system that goes in the back of the Herc, and you drop the pipe out the back of the parachute door, and you drop retardant or whatever out of it. It's something the US Forest Service use. It's not something I'm a fan of. It's more political than it is effective. And my view is that military pilots are trained to do military work, not firefighting work. And the reality is, those that know things about coverage levels, a mass unit, a max coverage level is coverage level 2, which is bugger all. I think that it's a nice feel-good political statement, but operationally, it would be a complete and utter cluster and a waste of time. So I think that hopefully that answers your question. Even if there's enough large air tankers in the world now that if we get our ducks in a row, that we can get them when we need them and bring them out and use them. The problem we've got now is sharing them between the north and southern hemispheres because our fire seasons are overlapping. I don't think there's a role for firebombing for RAF. I think if we were going to do anything with firebombing, it would be with military helicopters with buckets, but that would take a lot of work, a lot of training, and a lot of pre-exercising, and we'd also probably not put them at the coalface, we'd put them at the back edge or a flank of the fire. That's my view. What will be really interesting is to see what comes out of the Royal Commission about what is proposed for the use of ADF. Great pilots, great gear, but they're not firefighters. The pilots we have in our fixed wings and our helicopters are contractors, and they meet certain standards. They are highly skilled and really good gear, and I don't think we should be replacing them or even supplementing them with the military. The military's role in transport is fabulous, and logistics is fabulous. The role they did for us this year is just amazing, but I don't think it's in firefighting. Do the same rules apply for aircraft with reference areas they do for ground crews? Yes, they do. A reference area is simple. Either the IC says you can go in there or you can't. It's that simple. And we won't, they might think that we're less intrusive. So instead, if there's a fire in a reference area, instead of putting a dozer through it, we use aircraft, and anyone jump in from our land managers. But typically we'll try and avoid them. But if we need to, we would then only use water so that you're not using any chemical product, foam, gel, or retardant. I don't know if
that's pretty much what I was about to say. It's the same. Sometimes it'll be you can't use foam or retardant in the area, water only. But then in the last couple of years, we've had little fish, areas of little fish that are known to be in just one certain area that we're not allowed to even use water in that area, because if you use water from a different stream, that might contaminate or it might have these little fish in it. So very much they're the same. Sometimes it depends what the reference area is for, is probably the answer.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's a decision for the incident controller about whether you can or cannot use aircraft in there, or indeed ground crews. And for us, it's no different than working, say, in the harvest in Sea Lake, where there's a lot of organic farms, where we won't use foam, even though foam gives us more effectiveness. We'll simply use water so that we don't compromise the organic status of that farm. The last question.
You've just come out of the aircraft now, Riggsy. You're not distorted at all.
Oh, there you go. I'll shut it down. The other question there from Scott is, would you see us using winch like New South Wales? Yes, I would. It's another capability that raft crews and RART crews in New South Wales use very effectively. It comes at an enormous cost to train, to remain current. Where would you put them? How would you do it? What aircraft? There's a lot of questions with that. And I believe it was looked into in the Joe Buffoni period when he was the chief, and even under former Commissioner Lapsley. Where it sits now, I don't know. It's certainly not currently on the radar, but it's something that I think is a capability that will be looked at. Now, whether that's an expansion like what happens with RFS, where they, New South Wales Parks winch, RFS volunteers winch and have an enormous capability, or whether it's a land management role through PFS, Rappel, or whatever it may be, it would be a question about what the model looks like, but definitely winching in the future. So, Saz, that's the end of the questions, and we've been on for a long time.
We have been on for about an hour.
Yeah, maybe I've talked too much. But I'm happy to take any other questions verbally, or how about I grab Benny, and anyone, you can have a couple of minutes with Benny about asking a firebombing pilot anything you want. How does that sound?
If he's happy to go on and people have got some questions for a firebomber, that'd be awesome.
And I warn you, his head's worse than mine. Benno, come in here, mate. So everyone, this is Ben.
Lots of shine.
Ben's, I'm up here with him doing some land management work in partnership with Delp and Parks Vic. Benno's a Firebird pilot and a Helitac pilot. He flies a 204 medium for Forest Air. I'm not sure what else, but spent a lot of time with Benno fighting fires, and probably one of the best long-line pilots you'll come across with a bucket under his ship. So you've got a fella here that's pretty experienced. So if you've got any questions, fire away. And if they don't ask any questions, you've intimidated them with your look.
Right, I can go to bed.
If no one's asking any questions yet, I'll just mention something about how we used Firebird 300 in a police exercise the other year. We had a guy that was an arsonist that had been lining up around Tuluam, around that area, and had been for a number of weeks. And one of the FFMV guys got speaking to him, and we actually used Firebird 300 and the FLIR and the camera, etc., to guide the police in. And we've got it all on film. So it's not just useful in, obviously it was down here at the time we had fires. The police helicopter wasn't this far down. So it is useful for other things too. They dropped out, they stopped in Bairnsdale and picked up one of the senior sergeants, and then, they were guiding the police in via the radios. So some of our aircraft can be used for multiple uses, not just fires.
Absolutely, and that's a good use of the technology. Firebird 300 is also used as air observers and other technology as well for animal counts for the land management. Kangaroos, goats, etc. Stuff to do with weeds and plants and forestry and silviculture and all sorts of things. So we also SES use aircraft in flood support, and that's, I think, where that all communities, all emergencies aircraft comes in, Maddie, into the future. There's a lot of more than just firefighting. While that's the main focus, there's a lot more that goes on as well. And it's a wonderful group of both contractors and also agency people that make this happen. Now, there is 2 questions here. So what's the best way to mark or guide you to a hotspot?
Well, pretty much from guys on the ground.
Come in,
Needs
mate.
to come closer.
I'll sit down.
He's going to sit here and sit on my knee. Yeah, you talk, but you don't need me.
So marking hotspots and directing aircraft long line buckets potentially to hotspots. Big, large X's with lots of flagging tape is always a good one. If you have what they call a splash mat, might be a New South Wales term, but splash mats are also very handy. It's quite easily to pack with you and take, and it has an arrow pointing to where you actually want the target hit. Not speaking just for myself, but a lot of the long line pilots are very precision. So if you want to put it on a stump, then they'll put it either inside the stump or, exactly where you direct it to. So if you have it all just marked off, then sometimes we get confused and we'll just go for exactly where the X crosses over, and it may not be exactly where you want it. So for flagging, it's great. Splash mats is really good.
What about just comms? What about just verbal?
For comms, if you're calling in an aircraft, the best way is to start broad. So I can hear you. Can you come a little bit more to the north? If you can know which way north, south, east and west is, that's very handy. And then also using your clock angles. So if you're looking at an aircraft, remember it's not your clock angle, it is the pilot's clock angle. So can you come to your 3 o'clock being the pilot's 3 o'clock, and keep coming a little bit closer as such. And then maybe even straight ahead, or if you say behind you, well, it makes it a little bit harder to fly the aircraft backwards, but some pilots can do it.
And if I could just add, don't say, if Benno says, where are you? Don't say I'm in the red fire truck or I'm in the white ute. And certainly don't say, can you see the big tree with all the branches? Because where he is, he can see 1,000 of them. And we've heard all these before, by the way. We're in the red truck. Yeah, which one? There's 100 of them on the ground. Yeah. There's some other questions there, mate.
Pathway to becoming a pilot in firebombing. So I started off mustering up north. A lot of other people start off doing charter, either around Uluru or Great Barrier Reef, and then they progress into the air attack roles. So that's the best way is to become familiar with fire in a low pressure scenario. So you've got people like Riggsy sitting beside you in an air attack role, which they can sort of direct you in where they want the aircraft, and you're watching everyone underneath you bombing and where they're putting the water, and then you slowly get the hours in the fire area industry, and then you progress into larger machines, long lining and tanking, and get into that sort of firebombing in that regards. But it does take quite a few years and quite a few fire seasons, and usually the quiet and boring ones are the best ones to start.
There's another question now about that first one, which is about, would you see a survival blanket? You would, a red blanket.
You would see a survival blanket, but like I was saying, the splash mats have directions, so they have an arrow, and same with flagging tape. You know, you can make an arrow out of a flagging tape, whereas a blanket, generally, it's square. It won't have much indications on it. And a survival blanket is wool, so if we wet a wool blanket, you're going to carry that out and it'll be a nightmare. Sometimes very close to the fire and it contains intensity. How do you feel about the take on? So you're talking about fatigue in that last question. Yes, it does become fatiguing. As a safety and a personal sort of mitigation of that, it depends on which fire that you're working with, as to how close you are operating to the head of the fire or the flanking fire. Sometimes you've got to take a step back and think, well, I am only carrying 1,000 or 1,500 litres. Is this drop really going to change the distance or the difference of this big, huge flank? If it is, at the footsteps of a house, maybe it might. But, you also drop that and you may be 5 minutes going to reload, of which the house is gone. So, you've got to think about your safety first, the people on the ground. And if you can relay information to those people on the ground and say, too late, guys, time to get out, then, I've done my job, even though I haven't dropped any water. So, it's more of a, let's attack this fire and try and cut it off before it goes big, than, get right into the big, thick flames and the smoke and try and be the hero.
Cool. Nothing else there?
Awesome. No, nothing else there.
So I reckon, says we've probably done it this end. We've been hanging to have a beer.
We might call it a day. And thank you very much for your time, Riggsy and Ben. Much appreciated. It's great to have people from. We had 28, 29 people on it all in total. So thank you very much for coming on. Good to see some new faces again tonight. Thank you. And for everyone else's info, next week we've got Tim, don't know his surname, from Fleet. So Steve's organised Tim to come and chat to us from Fleet. Oh, hang on. We did have one question. Riggsy, Air Ops merchandise. Ask that.
Talk to me. Says you can share my work email with them. And
no worries.
There aren't any orders coming in the short term, but when I do one, I'm happy to add people to it, which is probably a little ways away at the moment, before the summer. And okay. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. Hope you got something out of it. I appreciate the really good questions and the good discussion. And Sarah, well done for leading this and getting it up and running. And thanks to everyone that contributed as well, Maddie and Cal and Dicko. And we'll catch you around. Stay safe and don't catch the virus. Just get some corona into you. You'll be right.
Awesome. Thank you very much. See you all next week, guys. And
guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Hang on. How do I get out of this now? I go. I don't know, Sarah. I got to hang out. Hang on. Stop. There we go.